is Memchet 48, and we pick up. We rushed the end yesterday, so I want to spend just a few minutes quickly rereading that. So let's pick up from the end yesterday from the following. Tani Rebbe Chia, the last line of Mem Zayin Amud Bet. So we talked about whether ownerless objects are limited to 2,000 amot. The Gemara has framed that as a debate of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the rabbis. And now we have this question about whether objects owned by non-Jews have no limit, because their owners don't have any limit of a tchum, or whether they also have 2,000 amot, and that's equally debated. And the Gemara said at the end of yesterday a case about objects brought from outside of the tchum, presume on Yontiv, and that they might be able to be purchased by the people within the tchum. So number one, what do you mean purchase? It's Yontiv. So I mentioned to you the halacha that if you need to get food for Simchas Yontiv, you can do a purchase without actually paying the money. And then the question is, but why are you allowed to move them? Aren't they defined by a tchum or not? And that was the issue, whether objects owned by a non-Jew are defined by the tchum. I should also mention that beyond all of that, there's a question about, normally the halacha is that if a non-Jew brings stuff from chutz l'tchum, forget about moving it because of tchum issues, you're not allowed to benefit from it. Because of when a goy does malacha for you on Shabbos and Yontiv and so on. So anyway, here presumably you'd have to say that they were bringing it for the other people of the city, the majority of the people not being Jewish. When they do it for the majority that aren't Jewish, then a Jewish person can benefit from it. The other important point about that case was that it said they could, even if they were chutz l'tchum, they could be carried throughout the city. So Rashi and Tosfos say it was a city with walls. It was like being brought into the barn from the first Mishnah. But other Rishonim say no, that even if it's chutz l'tchum, any place in the city is considered the same space. And again, that's a very relevant halacha for coming michutz l'tchum. Are you limited to a walled enclosure, or you have the whole city? Well, yes. Okay, correct. Now we pick up from Tani Rebbe Chia. We'll reread that. We read at the end of yesterday, last line of Mem Zayin Amud Bet. We won't spend a lot of time with it, but we'll just take it a little. We'll just reread it. Tani Rebbe Chia, Cherem shebein tchum el Shabbos. If you have a net that is in the middle of a river or some body of water that is, that divides the Tchum Shabbos of one city and the other city. So if you want to use the water on one side of the net or the other, based if you're city A or city B, you can only do that if there's an iron wall between it. Why? Because the water is considered to be the water of the people of the city, and it's not 2,000 amos from where the water is, but it is based on the people of the city. So the water, it goes out of tchum as soon as it crosses the net. So how can you use the water on the other side of the net? It's michutz l'tchum. So you can only do that if you have an iron wall. So Rabbi Yosi Bar Chanina laughed on this, mocked it. So the Gemara says, "My time mechayach. Why are you laughing? If it's because he holds like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and he's being strict, meaning that this is sort of like cheftze hefker, and therefore he's being strict to treat cheftze hefker as limited by a tchum. The iusphere like Rabban Lakula, and he holds like the rabbis Lakula, the cheftze hefker aren't limited. So mishum desavar Lakula, just because you are lenient, somebody who's going to be who's strict, you're going to mock them? That's a legitimate position. So I should just stop by noting two things. First of all, although we said halacha kedive hameko be'eruv, the Gemara here clearly feels that not everybody has to buy into that. That was not said as a divrei hakol before. It was one opinion that halacha kedive hameko be'eruv. So you see here the Gemara is not assuming that everybody has to agree to that. Number two, it's a little bit unclear why this is dependent on the issue of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the rabbis of cheftze hefker. Because if it was cheftze hefker, then it should not be defined by the people of the city. It should be 2,000 amot from where the water is, not 2,000 amot from where the people of the city are. So it's in this weird middle space that technically it's ownerless, but that the people of the city want to use it, and somehow that allows it to, or makes it defined by the people of the city. But again, it's a little bit strange, because if it was the real halacha of cheftze hefker, it would be its own 2,000 amot, not the 2,000 amot of the city. But anyway, that's how the Gemara frames it. It's cheftze hefker. So 1 minute. So what if he's being strict and limiting it by the 2,000 amot of the city? Why is that a reason to mock? Ella mishum titania. Here's why he was mocking it. Because I don't care, yes, cheftze hefker, not cheftze hefker. They should never have a tchum. Why? Because we taught in the Brisa, Naharas HaMoshchin Umayanos HaNovim, if you have a flowing river and other sort of bodies of water, Harein Kiragli Kol Adam, they are whoever, anybody can use them, and they're not limited because they're never Konesh Shvisa. So this should be the same. So the Gemara says, again, treating them as if they're Chefsei Hefker, not owned by the people of the city. So the Gemara says, V'dilma b'mechunasim. Why is that a problem? Well, why is that a reason to mock? Maybe this body of water was, stationary, was not flowing. Now, of course, the answer could be, no, it actually was a flowing body of water, but the Gemara is somehow saying, how do you know? Maybe it was a stationary body of water. Ella, because, the reason is that it doesn't because the statement was not about a particular body. It was an abstract statement. It says, Rabbi Chia says, Cherem shebein tchumei Shabbos. So since he wasn't speaking about a specific body of water, why would you mock? Maybe the statement was made in reference to a stationary body of water. Okay, so here's the Gemara. If it's a stationary body of water, and it is Kona Shvisa, and it is limited by 2,000 amot of the city, then Rabbi Chia is right. Then there's a real problem here. How can one side use the other side? The water is going chutz l'tchum. So it's a reasonable position. So the Gemara says, Ella, here's why it was being mocked. Mishum diktani tzarich mechitza shel barzol hafsiko. Because he thinks that I hear that you could say it's a problem. I don't get why you think you have a solution. How does an iron wall make it any better? Umayshna kanim delo. Why are you assuming that a reed wall would not be good enough? Presumably this netting. Why is this netting not good enough? Da'ili bumaya, because the water passes through it. So what good does the wall do if water passes through it? Okay, and then you're having water that went michutz l'tchum. So he says, if that's your problem, even if it's an iron wall, the water passes through it. Now, not literally through it, but under it. We're assuming you don't mean a wall having going all the way to the bottom of the floor of the lake or whatever it is. So we mean a 10 tefach wall. So he's saying, look, he was mocking it. If you really think you've got a problem, a 10 tefach iron wall isn't going to solve it. It's no better than a netting. And that was his issue. So the Gemara says, V'dioma, okay, but maybe his point was maybe his point was exactly that, was to make like a hyperbole and saying if you wanted to fix this, you would need an iron wall that would go all the way to the bottom and stop the water. And he wasn't really suggesting a solution. Maybe it was his way of articulating that there's no solution. You can't use the water. So good, that's a reasonable position. Why are you mocking it? So Ella, here's why he's mocking it. That even if I buy in that this is a problem, use that water from one side to the other side, mishum tekalu shekilu chachamim b'mayim. We know that the sages were lenient when it came to bodies of water, and in order to enable people to use the water, allowed it to be considered like there really was a wall, even though it normally would not satisfy the criteria of a wall. What is the classic case about that? You're on a boat, you want to draw water from the ocean, okay, it's a problem because, you're taking from the ocean, which is either Carmelis or whatever it is, and your boat is a Rishus HaYachid. So what you do is, before Shabbos, you create a little, box, on the side of the boat with no floor, and you lower the bucket through the box. Now, why does that work? And off the side. Because it's that box, which has four walls, is seen as going all the way down to the floor of the ocean and makes it a Rishus HaYachid. But the problem is that normally a mechitza that's off the ground doesn't count as a mechitza. And the answer is, it's a special leniency regarding water, bodies of water, to allow you to use the water and so on, and to have that mechitza work. So if we can say that mechitza goes down through the water to the floor, even though halachically it shouldn't work, so here too, this netting, it should be considered, even if I admit to your problem, it should be considered as a wall. It doesn't matter that there are holes in it, and as going to the ground. And I don't understand why you would have this whole issue with an iron wall. Iron wall is no better than the netting, and actually the netting should be just fine because we're dealing with bodies of water and we make these types of leniencies. So that's what it says. Rabbi Tavla, like Rabbi Tavla. The Baimine Rabbi Tavla me Rav. Rabbi Tavla asked Rav, Mechitza tluya ma'u shetati b'chur. But this suspended wall off the side of the boat, would that work on dry land? And Amalei said to him, Ein mechitza tluya materes el b'mayim. No, I'm sorry. This suspended wall only works in water. It's a special leniency by water, and here too he said, even if I admit that this is a problem, the netting should be a sufficient solution. Charlie, you had a question.
Oh, yeah, well, this is a general question. in secular law, there's very complicated and obscure rules regarding water rights.
Aha.
And we're talking about water that's flowing versus water that's not. So
Right.
How is there similar, and it differs in different parts of the United
Right.
States. In our legal system, do we have that kind of
water rights? You mean it's less about private and more about like the rights of a country and the water rights of a country?
Actually, it includes individuals. Like if how much water can I take from the Hudson River without returning it? How much water can I take from the Colorado River without returning it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about detailed issues. There's a whole discussion that the Gemara in Gittin has about sort of the Mediterranean, how much of the coast of the Mediterranean is considered to be part of Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to how much is considered, international waters. That's more for like.
That's actually another part.
That's more for like Hilchos Hakluyos Ba'aretz. But in terms of your sort of ownership issues and so on, not that comes to mind. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about wells of different, of one city and wells of another city, but not the same, I think, in terms of what you're talking about. Yes.
So then, what is the suggestion that you need Mechitza Barzel?
I have no idea. Okay.
Maybe
meant all the way to the floor. I don't know. Now we get back. Now it's actually we get back to the Mishnah, and this is the question about when you are stuck with your 4 amot because you went chutz l'tchum, or you fell asleep, and according to the position you weren't konesh shvisa. How do you measure the 4 amot? So the Chachamim say 4 amot, and then you have the position of, who was it, Rabbi Eliezer, that said you only have 2 amot in any direction, and the Chachamim say no, you have 4 amot, but once you pick a side, you're stuck to it. So meaning everybody agrees, according to that you have a box that's 4 by 4 amot. Rabbi Eliezer says you always are defined as the middle of the box. The Chachamim are saying you can define where you start in that box. You can say you have 1 amot behind you and 3 in front of you. You have 2 and 2. You have 4 amot in front of you, 0 behind you. So everybody agrees you've got the box. The question is, where do you start? And it's actually quite interesting that the Chachamim allow for such subjectivity. Normally we like things to be always the same. So that's the debate. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Hainu Tanakama. So the Chachamim first said 4 amot, then Rabbi Eliezer said 2 amot in each direction, and then Rabbi Yehuda said, no, 4 amot, but you get to pick which side. So the Gemara says, isn't Rabbi Yehuda who says 4 amot the same as the Tanakama? The Mishnah began by saying 4 amot. So Amar Rava, Shmona al Shmona ika beinayu. The first opinion that said 4 amot actually is much more lenient. The first opinion is 4 amot in each direction. The same way we say 2,000 amot in each direction. So when we give a number, we mean in each direction. The first opinion that said 4 amot means 4 amot in each direction, which is a box of 8 by 8 amot. So it first starts by saying you've got 4 amot, which implicitly means 4 amot in each direction. Then Rabbi Eliezer says, no, 2 amot in each direction. You're in the middle of a 4 by 4 box. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree to the 4 by 4 box, but you get to decide where you start. But the first position is much more lenient. It's you're in the middle of an 8 by 8 box. Okay, you have 4 amot in each direction. So now the Gemara says like this. Tanya Nami Halchi, we taught similarly, Yeshlo Shmona al Shmona Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, who isn't mentioned in our Mishnah, but is often the stam voice, in the Breita says explicitly, you're in the middle of an 8 by 8 box. V'amar Rava. Now Rava says machlokas lahalech. That issue of you have 4 amot in each direction. Are you an 8 by 8 box or a 4 by 4 box? That's about moving. If you're chutz l'tchum. Though carrying, like you can't carry in a Rishus Harabim. So Divrei Hakol Arba Amos In Tfeilo. Nobody would say, even Rabbi Meir would say that you cannot. If let's say here I was in the middle of my. Here I am. I'm in the middle of my 4 by 4 box. Here I am, according to Rabbi Meir. I have 4 amot this way, 4 amot that way. I can't go to this side, pick up an object, and then carry it all the way back to the other side, right? And carry the object 8 amot. Okay, everybody agrees that carrying in Rishut Harabim is limited to 4 amot from where I picked up the object. So even Rabbi Meir that says a box of 8 amot, that's for walking, that is not for carrying. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. V'hani arba amos heichaksiva. Where are these 4 amot written? Meaning, why is it? Okay, they might debate how. Are you in the? Is it 4 in each direction? Are you in the middle of the box? Are you at the edge of the box? But everybody agrees to the idea of 4 amot. Where is this? What is it based on? Where is it written in the pasuk? Okay, so it's interesting. The Gemara hasn't asked that yet. I know. Kidatanya, we taught in the Brisa. Shavu ish. Also, it had an answer it wanted to give. Shavu ish tachtav. Okay, every person should sit in his place, which is how we learn, the idea of not traveling outside of city limits, whether it's Dorais or Dorabanan. But anyway, each person sit in its place. Kitachtav, like the space underneath you. Now, it does not mean literally where your feet are standing, that is not 4x4, or even where you'd be sitting if you were sitting, but it means if you were completely, let's say, lying down. Okay? V'kama tachtav, how much is the space underneath you? Gufo shlosh amot. So your body is 3 amot. I'll get back to that in a minute. The amma plus an additional amma, kidei lishit yadav v'raglav, because if you are sleeping, you stretch out and you whatever, so that so where's the space for your arms or whatever, that gives you an extra amma. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's what Rabbi Meir says. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. No, Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's right. Rabbi Yehuda agrees, except he just describes it a little differently. Gufo shalosh amot, your body is 3 amot. The amma and the extra amma, kidei sheyito chayfetz mitachas margelosav u'miniach mitachas miroshasav. Take something from underneath your feet and put it underneath your head. So it's not exactly clear what that extra, because the object goes below your feet that you need, maybe as a pillow, a little bit above your head, and that gives you 4 amot. By the way, this idea of lying down on the ground and taking an object underneath your head very much evokes the whole Yaakov story. I don't know if that's intentional, but it's interesting. The first one, talks about lying down and then something under your head. Anyway, okay. My binai, what's the difference? They both agree to 4 amot. If it's precisely 4 amot, or maybe measured a little more loosely, because apparently Rashi says if it's the issue of stretching, that would give you a little bit, a little more. And there are different ways. There are different ways of measuring. There are different amot. There's amot with different sort of degrees of error or whatever, or buffer. The Gemara talks about different measuring sticks that they had in the Beis Hamikdash. Whether you hold your hand, the fingers are tight or the fingers are loose, right? Sochakot, or atzevot the Gemara had before. So anyway, there are slightly different measurements. Now, I want to say something about a person being 3 amot. So how big is 3 amot? So how big is an amma? So it depends who you ask. Reb Chaim Noah, who by now I think almost everybody accepts his measurements because he did the most thorough and rigorous analysis of all of the issues around the Amma. Plus everything he figured out was supported by archaeological findings. Particularly the archaeological findings that are most significant some that are most significant are the mikvos at Masada, because they had very little water at Masada. So the assumption is that those mikvaot would not be any bigger than they had to be, okay, and the size of mikvah is 3 amot by 1 amma, and actually that exactly corresponded to the measurements of Reb Chaim Noah. So his are pretty much not, some people are machmir for bigger measurements, but most people will agree that those are the most accurate measurements. So according to him, an amma is about 1.5 foot. A tefach is about 3 inches, a little more, I forget exactly, 3.1, 3.2, so you multiply it by 6, about 18, 19 inches, maybe a little bit more than 1.5 foot. Okay, so 3 amot is 4.5 feet. Now, it is true people were shorter back then, but not that much shorter. We're not talking about the Paleolithic period or something. Okay? So what's 4.5 feet talking about? So Tosfos says, he doesn't start with that question, but he starts with the following question. Tosfos says, in the Gemara and Baba Basra, when it talks about making a wall between different yards, and you're doing it for Hezek Re'iyah, for privacy purposes, so you can't see from one yard to the next, it says it has to be 4 amot. Why does it have to be 4 amot if this Gemara is saying people are only 3 amot? So Tosfos' first answer is, we're afraid that you might stand on your tippy toes in order to look at the other guy, what's going on in the other guy's backyard. So that's a great little answer. I just want to show you how the word he uses to describe standing onto your tippy toes is, he says, upami nami, this is in the word, in the gufo, like 4 lines in, upami nami says, shemagbia akivo, you lift up your heel, va'omed al etzba'ot raglav, and you stand on your toes. So, we have to keep the wall higher for prying guys. But then he says, no, actually the real answer, says Tosfos, is that 3 amot is till your shoulders, till your head. Plus your head is about another amah. Now that's funny, because then why didn't the Gemara say that for 4 amot. Why do you have to do the whole thing, tachas mirosh hasaf? But Tosfos says, because people normally don't lie totally flat out. They curl a little bit. It's also a problem because the size of a mikveh is 3 amot by an amma. And that's supposed to be the size for a person. So Tosfos also says, well, when you go in the water, you crouch down a little bit. But there is this little problem that the simple sense of the Gemara sounds like the full height of a person is 3 amot, but it doesn't work in terms of how we measure an amma, and it doesn't work, in terms of some other sources. So generally what's accepted is Tosfos' interpretation, which is 3 amot till shoulder height plus your head, so 4.5 feet till shoulder height. For Jews, that's probably about accurate, yes.
Well, you mentioned leniency, but with shear of leniencies creates stringencies and vice versa. So you can have a shorter makitza with a smaller amma, but you also have less distance you can travel on Shabbos.
Right, that's true. So there are all those consequences. Some people might be machmir in all directions all the time, but Reb Chaim Noah is basically accepted as the basic size. Tosfos also points out that the size of the what are those called? The kuchim is the Hebrew word, but the niches in the wall of a cave that they bury people in, catacombs. No, but what's the niche called? Is there a word for the niche? Anyway, the Gemara says that length is 4 amot. So now, of course, you're all, so that's Tosfos says you see that with the head it's 4 amot. Yes, Rivka.
The shul Ishtak seems pretty clear, and the rabbis went beyond that, permitting us to make Erev. They really violated. I know the Kara.
Well, yes, but of course the simple sense of the psukim. Right, the simple sense of the psukim though is in the context of the man. Right, it's not that absolutely you can't move. It's like don't go out and search for the man. I understand. So they're striking a balance. They're learning from the pasuk, but describing it very broadly. Right. I know, which is why it's more seen as an asmachta. But you're right. If you are, look,
another example of the rabbis really abrogating.
Well, I wouldn't call it abrogating. No, if you feel that it's really biblical law, then you're making a radical change in the pshat. But they felt that this was the dominant position is that that's not what the pasuk means, and that this whole issue it's all an asmachta. And I don't think that, but I do think the larger point being that people don't appreciate that of the different sects and flavors of Judaism that was around at that time, Chazal were by far the most lenient. Vis-a-vis the Prushim and the Tzedukah. They were the Prushim. Vis-a-vis the Tzedukim and the Essenes and whatever. Right, and the cat. Right, correct. Okay, so let's go further. So now it says like this. Okay. So the Gemara says like this. Amalei Rav Mesharshia. So Rav Mesharshia said Libre to his son. Kia Yalis Lakami to Rav Papa. When you go to Rav Papa, he was maybe going to learn there at the yeshiva, whatever. Anyway, when you go see Rav Papa, Boimine, ask from him the following issue. Arba Amos Shamru. When they say a person has 4 amot, whether 4 in each direction, a total of 4x4. The Amadi Day Yavinanle, do we measure it with subjectively, because it's based on Shavu Ish Tachtav, which is like your space, and if it's an idea based on the pasuk and conceptually an idea of your space, then maybe we should measure it in your amot. So
if like 5 or 6, right? You don't mean by you. If you're really big, then you're really small.
Yes. So the question is that if you're big and you have long arms, so you're 4 amot. An amma is from the elbow to the top of your middle finger. So we should measure it in your 4 amot, and you should get more space because your space is more. You're a big guy, or less if you're a small guy. Okay, so do we measure it by amos didei yavinanle or by amos shel kodesh yavinanle? Or by the standard amad. It says Yamad Shel Kodesh because they kept the the measuring sticks in the Beis Hamikdash. So they were different measuring sticks that they used for building the Beis Hamikdash, and that was like my father used to work at the National Bureau of Standards, which is now called the National Institute of Science and Technology, and they had there encased in glass the official measurement of a meter, and it was like what was it made in something like gold or some type of a metal.
It's an alloy that does not contract.
An alloy that does not contract, and that was the measurement of a meter for Kol Olam Kula. So this was the same thing. They had in the Beis Hamikdash the official measurement of an amma. So that's the way of referring to a standard amma.
A foot is actually legally defined in terms of meters, 30.48 centimeters.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so, all right. So it says, Im amalucha, if he tells you amos show kodesh yavinon lei, that we do standardized amot. So Og Melech HaBoshem Matei. So let's say you happen to have Og who converted, and and he's trying to keep Shabbos, and he only has 4 amot for him. For him, 4 amot, he can't even move his foot. So obviously. So anyway, it's a little bit of a reductio ad absurdum, but the point being that if the idea is to give a guy space to move around, maybe you have to be more flexible based on the size of the person. Okay, and if he tells you fine, we'll measure it with that person's own amma. Amalei, say to him, if that's true, my time we have a mishnah in Kalim that says a list of things that you measure based on the individual person and not by a standard measurement. Like when the Kohen takes for the mincha, the kometz, how big is a kometz? It goes by the individual Kohen. When he takes for burning the Ketores on Yom Kippur, Malochaf Nov, right, his 2 scoops of both his hands, it doesn't go by a standard measure, it goes by the individual Kohen. So that Mishnah there lists things that go by the individual. So why didn't it mention? So why didn't it mention the 4 amot if this is really subjective? So if it's subjective, it should have been in the list. And if it's objective, and if it's an objective 4 amot measurement, then it's not fair to big people. So what's the halacha?
So it's just talking about ritual things in the Beit HaMikdash.
Oh no, not just ritual in the Beit HaMikdash. So it's a whole list of things. So anyway, so the Gemara says, okay, so that's what you should ask Rav Papa. Okay. He also looked to Rav Papa, so he came to Rav Papa. Amalei, and Rav Papa said back to him, "Idakinan kulei hai lo avetaninan." If we would spend all of our time, asking these types of questions, we would never get any learning done. This is a great lie. Anyway, so it's not exactly clear what bothered him so much, but apparently, as we'll see from his answer, let's see his answer, and then I'll tell you back how some people explain what that response meant. Which is a surprising answer, because it's very rare that we do subjective measurements. So actually, we do the person's measurements. You make a good point, that if it's a big guy, we got to give him more space. Why is it not in that list over there in Kalim of things that go by the individual person? Because it's not always true. Why is it not always true? You could have a guy that has foreshortened limbs, not nanas of midget. Presumably, the Gemara would say if he's a small guy, maybe we do give him less, because it's all about giving you a space to move around. But let's say you have disproportionate limbs. Let's say you're a really big guy, but you have short arms. So then, if we give you your 4 amot measured by your arm, we're actually giving you less space than is appropriate. So for that type of a person, we would give a standard 4 amot. So we give you a subjective one, presumably if it's more lenient. If you're a big guy, it's not clear what we would give you if you're totally a small guy. Maybe it would also be smaller. But if somehow it doesn't make sense, there's some disproportion going on, then we would give you the standard 4 amot. Amot shel hekdesh. So anyway, some say that his reason of saying, if we would ask those types of questions, the word dayek often means to learn something from the precise formulation of the text. So here he's saying your question was not based on how the text was written. Your question was based on the fact that something was missing from a list. You said if it was subjective, it should have been on a list. That's not a real good deal. There's a lot of reasons why things might not be on a list. Some want to say that's why he was responding, you're spending too much time on the questions. It shouldn't bother you so much why something isn't on the list. There could be other reasons. 1 minute, first over the question. What?
Yes. So maybe this is related to the idea of we had before. If you don't know where the chum is, then you paste 2,000 pages. Because
that's a interesting point. It's the same type of thing that's a subjective.
It's not just like an exigency, but maybe that's actually, maybe it's the same thing. It's by your amos, by your...
Yeah, except that none of the poskim say that. They say that that's only if you don't know. Meaning, if I actually am a big guy, and we've measured the 2,000 amot, and I know that my paces are bigger, nobody says I get more.
Well, that was going to be my first question. Should it be, is it...
No, so that's never raised. Yeah, that's never raised. Here the emphasis seems to be that the idea of form of, first of all, it's learned from the word tachtav, which is very subjective, your space. And also, it seems to be, as opposed to 2,000 amot, that, you can't make a guy stand stock still the entire Shabbos. You need a certain amount of space to move around. So there seemed to be almost like an injustice. If you're a huge guy and to squeeze you into a small box, that seemed to be what bothers the Gemara. The 2,000 amot, you're right, you can use your pace as an estimate, but nobody ever says that's the actual, measurement. Rivka?
I want just a reality check. someone is in the desert somewhere.
Yeah.
They really expect a person
To be stuck? Well,
for 24 hours not to move.
I mean, I know it is a little crazy. I mean, look, you can. The idea for a mut is you can just sit down and lie down and hang out there. Now,
24 hours.
of course, you remember the Mishnah at the beginning did say, if you have to go to the bathroom, you can go out of there, and if you happen to find a space within the tchum, then you're back into the tchum. But that's assuming that you left against your will. If you willfully violated and left, you really are stuck. But I think it's important. I know it's important that you raise the question. Look, because it is true. It's possible to do. You can just lie down and take a long nap for all of Shabbos. It's not impossible, but it is hard to imagine that somebody could abide by this. You are correct. Which is why I think again the Gemara before gave you some outs about walking. You going to the bathroom and walking back, but that didn't work in all cases. I think that you're right. The reality check is a good one. I don't know how people would actually do it. All right, so let's see now as the Gemara continues. So the Gemara then, the next case in the Mishnah, if you'll remember, said if you have two people whose, their 4 amot overlap, then they can, bring stuff and use stuff in the overlapping space because they're moving within each other's, space is okay, but they can't go to sort of the spaces at the edge because, if these are the two people, they can use the space in between them if it's overlapping space, but the space behind them, right, the external space, two people like the space behind them, this guy can't use the space behind him because it's outside of his 4 amot and vice versa. Okay, or he can't even walk there, let alone use it. Okay?
Then you could have two people and a child.
Right. Well, that's what the Gemara said. And then it came to the case of it said, that is similar, like if it had cases of 3 people, right? So it says, first it had this case, and it said this guy's 4 amot is like this guy's is like this, and this guy's is like this. So this guy can use shared space here and shared space here, but these two, obviously this guy cannot go ahead and even walk into, let alone take stuff out of that space. And then it says what's that similar to? It's similar to 3 courtyards that are open one to another and open to the Reshut HaRabim. Okay? And I'll say in a minute say why it's important that they're open to the Reshut HaRabim. 3 courtyards, and here's the Reshut HaRabim. Again, and if these two made an Eruv, and these two made an Eruv, so same story. These two can use all of this space, these two can use all of this space, so the middle guy can use any space and so on, but this guy can't use his space because there's no Eruv from the outer extremities. The reason it has to be open to Reshut HaRabim is because if it wasn't, if you had a case like this, and we'll see this later, if this was the street, okay, and the courtyards were like this, and it wasn't that all of them were open to Reshut HaRabim, it was only one of them, and to get to the back courtyard you had to go through the others, then you cannot make, in some ways, we will worry about the details later, you cannot make independent Eiruvin because they're not standalone. They necessarily are, these people in this courtyard necessarily relate to people in the outer courtyards. Okay, so that's why it says that it opens to Reshut HaRabim, so you don't have to worry about that case. Yes?
So what if you had your 4 amot square and you had 2 people both standing right in the middle of it? And so it supposedly had the same
4 amot.
Had the same 4
Yeah.
amot. But they have to choose a direction, and one of them chooses this direction.
Oh, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that you choose which direction.
Let's say the other one goes another direction.
Yes.
He goes along the hypotenuse.
Yes.
Which would be longer than the 4 amot.
No, that's a good point. You don't. You mean?
And who defines it first, right?
No, yeah, but each person gets to define his 4 amot. In your case, if this guy wanted to say, this is according to Rabbi Yehuda, that says you pick where you are in the box. So if this one wanted to do this and this one wanted to do that, it's true that if he sort of did it like this, he could go further down here, but it would have consequences, where you are in the box. Okay, let's take a look now as the Gemara continues. Why did it have to say, oh, this is just like the courtyard case? What was difficult about that issue that you had to bring in the courtyard case? The courtyard case actually is more complicated, as we're going to see in a few minutes. So, here's the point. Because we're about to see in the courtyard case that while Reb Shimon says, like we saw, that, the middle can do with the outer, but the outer can't do with one another, we're going to see in a minute that the rabbis say none of them can do it. In this case of the courtyards here, none of them can move into anybody else's space. It doesn't work. Okay, and we'll see why in a minute. So what Reb Shimon is saying to the Rabbanan is, why do you argue with me in the courtyard case? It should be just like the people case, where you agree with me. So Hachi Kamar le Reb Shimon the Rabbanan. Michti, let's take a look. This case of the three people is just like three courtyards. Why there by the courtyards do you say that if you don't do one big area for all three, everybody's got a problem? And why here do you agree that it can work, that the middle guy is okay with the 2-hour guys? Rabbanan, and the rabbis will say back, Hasam Avshu Diyarim. There are a lot of inhabitants in the courtyard. Hacha Lo Avshu Diyarim. Here, there are not a lot of inhabitants. So what does that mean? So hold on, I just want to check what Rashi says. Just 1 minute. Right. So basically, the way Rashi says is, look, here I can manage that if you tell me move in this space and not move in that space, fine. There's only 3 of us. I'll remember to only go up to my area. If I won't accidentally, just because you middle guy are using that space, I'm not going to accidentally go into that space. But in the courtyard case, if you allow this, there's so many people that live here, right? And and so many people that live here that once you start allowing people to go into here, somebody is going to forget and wind up going, and going into the other courtyard and using the space of the other courtyard. So because there are few people here, there's not too many moving parts to manage, and you can remember where everybody can go up to. But because here there's so many people, we can't allow this because it'll come to then you going there and using their stuff.
If fewer people know the halacha.
I know. Sometimes we do say if there's a lot of people, they'll remind one another. But here, there's it's a lot of people not working together as a group. It's a lot of people in a shared space, but with, a lot of moving parts. So therefore, as he says, in this case we don't like it because it's going to lead to problematic. It's going to lead to moving kalim from the courtyard A to courtyard C and courtyard C to courtyard A. There are just too many people involved. Okay, so let's take a look now as we turn to this courtyard case. V'shtayim chitzonos, and the 2 outer ones, I'll call them A and C, cannot, use one another's space. You can't take kalim from A and move them into C, or from C and move them into A, and so on. Now, it doesn't mean, I want to clarify that, it doesn't mean that somebody over here, let's make this clearer, right? We're back to this again, as you see, by the way. Back to the diagrams. Okay. It doesn't mean that, somebody from A can't walk over to C and use the kalim in courtyard C. If they made here, if I go from a whole different street, from a mile away, assuming it's not a problem, and come visit you in your courtyard, and I haven't made an Eruv with you, since you made an Eruv, I can carry in your courtyard. Why not? You made an Eruv. This is a good space. It's all one unified Rishus HaYachid. The problem is, what it really means when it says A and C, our problem is, I can't take a Kli, some type of a vessel or whatever, something that was in the courtyard, and move it from C to A or from A to C. Because the space here, that's all considered to be one unified space, is the BC space. So I can't take something from the BC space and move it into the A space, and I can't take something from the A space and move it into the C space. So that's just to be clear what it means. I'm allowed to go there and move the vessels that are there, but I can't take vessels from outside of there and move them into there. Yes?
It's actually kind of a leniency that you can't even have B going to either one, because B is unified with C and with A.
Right, so that's exactly so that's essentially what the Rabbanan are saying. Yeah. They're saying, in the case of 3 people, that exactly illustrates the point. With 3 people, I can allow the middle guy to be okay with the guy to his left and the guy to his right, and we're not somehow concerned, because, it's not a lot of confusion. But here, and I think it's a good point that Charlie makes, what you could wind up doing is, you could take a vessel from A into B, right? And that's allowed, and use it there, and then you sort of forget where that vessel came from, and then you wind up taking it from B into C. And that's exactly why the rabbis say that even if in principle this is okay, we're not going to let this work, because it's more likely to be problems than the 3 people case. And that's exactly what the Gemara just said. Okay, yes?
What if you had this vessel, and you carried it from C to B,
right,
then gave it to somebody else, and then walked to A, and the other, that's somebody else from B, carried it.
It doesn't matter what the person is doing. It sort of matters, in terms of the vessel and so on. Okay, but it's an interesting question about what happens if it stops in the middle. Does it sort of come like a makom tour, etc. So keep that in mind as we continue the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Okay, so the Gemara says why is this? Why is it in this ABC case? Why is it that the Gemara is going to say it should be more lenient? It should all be one rishus. So the Gemara says, I don't get it. If B and C are combined and A and B are combined, then that could all make it into one. Now it's assuming that the Eruv, the box of matzahs, which I'll call it, is placed in B. So if the Eruv, if both A, B, and BC is placed in B, right? So let's say you have your one house here that has both Eruvs, okay? So if that's true, this one house represents a unified AB and a unified BC, and it's all in one house, so it should be a unified ABC. Okay, it should all unify everything. So the Gemara says, I'm a Rav Yehuda. The problem was, no, AB's Eruv was put in A, and BC's Eruv was put in C. Okay, so that's why they remain separate, because they're not brought together in B. Now Shesha says, even if A, B, and BC, the Eruv was both in B, Kigon Shenasnuhu. You thought we weren't going to finish today. I knew what side B looked like. Kigon Shenasnuhu B'shnei Batim. It's like you put it in two houses. The problem was that you put the AB Eruv here, and you put the BC Eruv, they could be next door to one another here. So what it winds up doing is, it basically says that there is, as if everybody, AB is this whole space. Let's call this guy's house, I don't know, Fred, and we'll call this guy John.
How about Barney?
So Barney. Yeah, basically what it says is, right, that it's not all Fred's space. If it was all in Fred's house, it would all be Fred's space. But it's not all in Fred's house. So what it basically says is that this is Fred's space, and this is John's space. And therefore, it's not all one space. And that's why you've got a problem, because it's in two separate houses. Okay? Okay. Timan, says the Gemara, according to whom are you saying that two separate houses is a problem? Beit Shammai, like Beit Shammai, the tiny, we turn the brisa. Eiruvin. 5 people collected there. 5 is just a number, to indicate many, right? Okay, all the people in the courtyard. They collected the Eruv. They put the foods in 2 vessels. Beit Shammai omrim ein Eiruvin Eruv. It's not good. It all has to be in one vessel. Beit Hillel omrim Eiruvin Eruv. It is good. So we're assuming that according to Beit Hillel, they could be, significantly separated from one another and considered to be one. So the Gemara makes the obvious distinction. Afilu tema Beit Hillel. No, this answer works even according to Beit Hillel. Ad kan lo kami Beit Hillel hasam. When does Beit Hillel say it's one? El b'shnei kelim b'vais achad. 2 vessels in one house, because the whole idea is to define everything as essentially the domain of that one house. Avo b'shnei batim lo. 2 separate houses, they would not say it's one Eruv. They would say it's separate Eruvs. And here too, basically, you have a John space and a Fred space, and they do not get unified, even if they're both in courtyard B. Okay. So now we understand why this works, why it isn't better that it's all essentially B, because it's not all in the same house. And we also understand why the Chachamim disagree, because it's quite likely if you allow AB, then it'll turn into an AC type of a case, and vice versa. Okay, and that's what the rabbi said before, and why they didn't like it. Now we're going to say, you know what? This really should be fine, and it should be totally one Rishus regardless. So Rav Yehuda said to Rav Ashi, Rav Yehuda kasha, Rav Sheshes kasha. Whether Rav Yehuda's explanation that the Eruv was put in A and in C, or Rav Sheshes' explanation that it was put in B, but one in Fred's house and one in John's house. Okay, either way, I have a problem, and really it should be better. It should all be fine. Why? Rav Yehuda kasha. Here's my question according to Rav Yehuda, that it was put in A and in C. The Amar Kigon Shenasna and Tzoyis Eruva Bezu Ve'Eruva Bezu. That B Eruv was put in A and the BC Eruv was put in C. So here's my question. Once A and B make their Eruv, and the Eruv is put in A, now we have AB as a defined unit, right? AB made an Eruv. Things have to happen sequentially in time. So we'll imagine that AB's Eruv happened first and BC's Eruv happened second. So AB made an Eruv, they put their Eruv in A, fine. Now they're one AB unit. Okay. Then what happens? Where were we? Then when if the people of B all get together and make an Eruv with C, so Shlichusta Avda, the people of B are no longer people of B. They're people of a new country, right? It's AB, right? It's not Czechs or Slovaks, it's Czechoslovakia now. So now when B combines with C, it's the people of Czechoslovakia, it's the people of AB, and therefore should define as one big Eruv together with C. Okay, they're just doing the shlichus of their friends back there in A.
Or you say just the opposite. They didn't do it all at the same time.
That's what the Gemara is going to answer. Okay, so I think that way I still don't get why it doesn't all become one big domain. Well, if Shesh's kasha, and according to Shesh's in different houses, I also have a problem. Tehave kichamisha sheshiruyim chater achas. It could actually be worse according to Rav Shesh's. Why? Imagine you had 5 people in one domain. V'shochach echad mehen. V'lo irev. And one guy didn't participate in the Eruv. What's the consequence of that? The Asya Hadadi. If one guy is left out, then it's all a problem. It doesn't work because it's not one unified domain. So he's saying, according to Rav Sheshes, right, I don't get it. If you have separate houses, so basically within courtyard B, it's all Fred's domain and it's all John's domain, right? So there are 2 separate rishuyos going on in B. Well, normally, if you don't have everybody participating in one unified rishus and a chutzner, it doesn't work. The whole idea is to unify it. So according to this, it should not be considered unified at all, and nobody could carry, right?
So by this opinion, it would be a problem to have overlapping Eruvs in a city, which used to be the case in Manhattan and the Bronx, and is today the case in Flatbush.
Right, so...
And Eiruvim are in different synagogues.
Right. So that's that's an interesting question, which I have to think about. But you are right. That's essentially what's being asked. While the argument is that overlapping should be okay, the argument is no. It should define it as 2 competing spaces.
Yeah, it used to be one Eruv was at Lincoln Square and the other was here at this.
Interesting. Okay, so we will. So let's keep that in mind as we see what the resolution to this is. All right. So the Gemara says like this. So Amalei Ravashi. So Ravashi said back, Lo Rav Yehuda kasha, v'lo Rav Sheshes kasha. It's not difficult according to Rav Yehuda, not to Rav Sheshes. Okay, Rav Yehuda lo kasha. Rav Yehuda, you wanted to say you created an AB entity and then it was joining together with C. No. Like Michael said, since the middle one going together with the outer one, but the outer ones did not. Nobody from A joined together with C or vice versa. So if that's true, they made it clear that when B was joining together with C, that wasn't their interest. The fact that A sat that out and, was willing to make an A with B, but sat out the BC thing, made it clear that they did not want to join together with C. So you cannot say that when B was going to C, they were representing also A. Okay, so that doesn't bother me. Okay, they don't become one entity for all purposes. Okay, so that's fine. Now, how about the other question? According to Rav Sheshes, it's not a problem. Just because we're going to be lenient and basically, in order to consider it like everybody lives here and everybody lives here. Lahakal is how the Eruv works. We consider them all living in one place. So that's in order to be lenient, but we're not going to be machmir and say that it's literally as if somebody from courtyard B sat out. Nobody from courtyard B sat out. Okay, people from the other courtyards are seen as, everybody from A is now living in Fred's house, and everybody in C is now seen as living in John's house. Okay, but the reality, that's only like theoretically in order to allow it to be defined as one domain. It's not a reality. And the reality is that everybody that's really living in B is participating in the Eruv, and nobody is sitting it out. Okay. Now, I'm going to review them a Rav, so let's start introducing one more case, just because this wasn't confusing enough. And you see this huge total, so there's 2 major different explanations of this Gemara. I'm going to give you Rashi's. Zu Divrei Rabbi Shimon. This is the position of Rabbi Shimon, that A, B works and B, C works. Of a Chachamim, the Chachamim say, now before we have the Chachamim saying something because they were concerned about a Gzeira, you'll come to accidentally go from A to C. Here we're going to make a more principled objection to Rabbi Shimon. What do the Chachamim say? Rishus achas mishameshes l'shtei rishuyot. One domain can be used by two other domains. Avalo shtei rishuyot mishameshes l'rishut achat. But two domains cannot be serving one domain. What does that mean? Well, that should be totally transparent, right? Which is why Rashi and Tosfos have completely opposite explanations of what it means. So what Rashi says it means is the following. Rashi says, look, here's the problem. It should have been evident really. Rashi's explanation is quite good based on, if you were looking at this, right, it should be clear that, B should be conceptually problematic because B is, competing rishuyot. Mm-hmm. Whether you put the Eruv in Fred and John's house, you put the Eruv in A and C. Nevertheless, there's two separate rishuyot going on in B. Okay, so that's what Rashi says is why the Chachamim disagree. They say rishus achas. Let me just get the language right. Okay, these two rishuyot, A and C, cannot. One domain B cannot make use of both A and of C. Right. If it's making use of both A and of C, it is essentially saying, pulling itself in both and contradictory ways. So B cannot carry anything into A, and B cannot carry anything into C. Because once it does, it basically is saying that it has competing alliances and it has no unified mission. But A can carry into B because B can be considered it could be A is the dominant rishus, right? And B, and so it could be like this, right? Yeah. A is the dominant using B, C is the dominant using B. There's no contradiction here. Okay, but for B to carry from its rishus into A, or for B to carry from its rishus into C, then you have essentially this, and that's a contradiction. Okay, because then because B is showing that it's being pulled in opposite ways and it's not unified. So according to Rashi, what the Gemara means is rishus achas meshameshes l'shtei rishuyot. These are the shtei rishuyot, A and C. They can both make use of B. They can both carry into B and make use of B, but ain't shtei rishuyot. So rishus achas mishameshet l'shtei rishuyot. So rishus achas is B. B can serve two rishuyot. It can serve A and it can serve C. But ain't shtei rishuyot mishameshet l'rishut achad. But C and B and A cannot both serve B, because if they're both serving B, B is using both of them, then it is a contradiction being pulled in opposite directions. So as the short version being, A can carry into B, C can carry into B, but B can't carry into the opposite ones because that's conceptually contradictory. I will just tell you, just not to confuse you more, but Tosfos says the exact opposite. Tosfos says, for practical reasons, conceptually you understand what Rashi is saying, right? You understand that this is a contradiction, this is not a conceptual contradiction, but practically, Tosfos says it's the exact opposite. If you allow A to carry into B, what might happen?
A will then carry into C.
Then it will lead to keep bringing it to C. So Tosfos and C to B will lead to A. So Tosfos says the opposite. B can carry into A because it's taking it away from a problematic space. And B can carry into C because it's taking it away from a problematic space. But A cannot carry into B and C cannot carry into B. The exact opposite of Rashi.
What's the point of the
What? What the point of the A is it lets B.
Only for B.
Yeah.
A and C.
Right. But it's the exact opposite of Rashi. Rashi says the point of the A was for A and C. Didn't help B. Okay? So anyway, Rashi is a conceptual issue that it's being pulled in opposite directions. Tosfos is a practical issue. If we allow carrying this way, it'll come to be more of a problem. All right? And we will see what the response of this is in the tomorrow in the Gemara.
According to Rashi's explanation, can be carried